Hi, everyone. This is Nina Amir, the Inspiration to Creation Coach and the founder of National Nonfiction Writing Month, also known as the Write Nonfiction in November Challenge. Welcome to week 2 of the challenge. Today we are discussing traditional publishing. And I'm here with my publisher of two of my books, How to Blog a Book, both editions, and the author training manual. I'm here with Phil Sexton of Writer's Digest Books. And if anyone knows something about the world of publishing, I think it's probably Phil, also about nonfiction books. He has his finger on the pulse of what's happening in the world of publishing because of all the books that he's publishing about publishing and writing. So I want to tell you a little bit about him before I actually say hi to him. Phil Sexton is the publisher of Writer's Digest. Over more than 25 years in the book business, he's served in numerous capacities, including Vice President of Sales for F&W Media, Sales Director of Adams Media, Director of Merchandising for United Magazine Company, an independent bookseller. And he's also the author of A Picture is Worth 1,000 Words, Legends of Literature, The Writer's Lab, The Writer's Adventure, and co-author of The Writer's Book of Matches. So Phil actually knows a lot about writing books as well as publishing them, and he knows a bit about magazines, which of course I have a degree of magazine journalism, and a lot of people who are listening also are interested in writing for publication. So I want to welcome you, Phil, and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be here with me.
Oh, thank you, Nina. I appreciate the offer and anything I can do to help.
That's great. Well, we have a lot of people who will be listening, and they're all trying to get their books done in 30 days. Or actually, they may be writing articles in 30 days, or they may be doing a book proposal in 30 days, or really any kind of nonfiction in 30 days. Some of them might be doing 30 days of blog posts, you know. It doesn't really matter as far as this challenge goes what they're doing, as long as it's nonfiction and they have set themselves a goal for the 30 days. But for the purposes of our conversation, we're going to be talking about publishing of nonfiction books and how to be a successful nonfiction author. Okay?
All right.
So you're
ready to go?
Yeah, good. Let's talk publishing. So I speak about the need for aspiring authors to create a business plan for your books. I mean, obviously, you know that because I wrote a whole book on it, the author training manual. And I think that they need this business plan no matter how they publish. In particular, though, I point out that a traditional publisher sees a nonfiction book proposal as a business plan and uses it as such. But rarely do aspiring authors get to hear from a publisher about how their book proposal is used. Can you explain if it's true that their book proposal becomes a business plan or is seen as a business plan, and why that is true?
Sure. I can confirm that it is seen as that, and it's hugely important. It's always been important to create a proposal like that, but more now so than ever, I think, just because of the level of competition, the fact that there's less space in particularly brick and mortar bookstores in order to secure a presence for a book. You want to make sure that your book is seen as something that the salespeople are going to pay the most attention to, that are going to give the most effort to try and make sure that book gets a good buy from buyers. And you know, one of the things that we look at as publishers, but the salespeople, everyone looks at details like, why will the project work? Why is it? Who's it for? Why those people are going to care? And how the author is going to work with the publisher to get the word out. And a really solid business plan for a book will answer all of those questions. It's research that the publisher could do, but the less work you make the publisher do, the more likely they are to pay attention to that proposal. And I would say the other thing about it is that a lot of people write the proposal thinking that the only eyes that are going to see it are editorial. And editorial are going to then go pitch the book, and magic happens on the other end, and their book ends up in bookstores. But the details that you put in that proposal go to Pubboard, they go into marketing documents, they go into the catalog, they go into sell sheets, they go into the copy that's online at Amazon. I mean, it all the way through to the hands of the consumer. So the better that document is, the more effective it's going to be all the way through the line. So, you have to take as much care with that as you do your manuscript.
Right. Yeah. So that's great. That's a great description of what happens. And I always tell people, that exact thing. You better see this as the content you're putting in that business plan, that it could end up on Amazon. It could end up on the back of your book. It could end up anywhere if you've done a good job.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so what is an acquisitions editor or a publisher looking for in a proposal? Because we're always trying to figure out, what do we have to put in there to catch your attention? But there must be certain things you're actually looking for specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there are 3 or 4 most important things. And when I speak about nonfiction book proposals at conferences, a few of the things I say is that if you're going to pitch a book to a publisher, your book there has to be an urgent need for it, or a very high level of interest for some reason. You have to be able to define that there's a big audience, and you have to be able to call out what the USP is. And the USP is the unique selling proposition. The problem is, if there's a big audience for the book, but there's not an urgent need, then it's not really going to sell that well. If there's an urgent need, but there's not a big audience, then your sales potential is limited. So you want to make sure you have both of those. The USP, unique selling proposition, the reason why that's key is because that's hugely important to buyers. And what a unique selling proposition does is it says, okay, your book is about a topic that perhaps has a proven track record with other books. There are other books that have worked and sold. That gives the buyer confidence that, okay, this book is on a topic that we know there's an audience for and that we know is potentially going to buy that book. But the buyer doesn't want to feel like they're purchasing something that is already on their shelf. They want to purchase something that maybe deals with that same topic, but from a very unique viewpoint, where it has some unique aspect to how it's treated or how the issues raised are answered. And that could be as simple as it's an interactive book, or maybe there's a supporting website that has all sorts of enhancements to it. It could be, we did a series of history books several years back when I was, even before Adams Media, where it was history, but about 50% of the content in those history books was actually created from letters and documents of the period. And so it was telling history through firsthand accounts, which made it very different than most of the other history books that were on the shelf at the time. So the publisher, the buyers, they're always looking for that sort of thing that balances a confidence in potential sale with the interest level associated with approaching that topic differently.
Okay. So, and when you say unique selling proposition, is that information, is that going into the pitch or is that going somewhere else in the proposal?
No, I mean, I usually try and, if you're defining what the topic is in the beginning of your proposal, and you're talking about how you're going to address that topic or that issue, I usually would say put the USP right up front. The publisher wants to know why it's different, why this book is unique. So yeah, I would not hold back on that and bury it.
Okay. All right. Great. So what actually happens to that proposal when it goes to pub board or editorial board, whatever it's called at a particular publishing house? Because there is this meeting that happens, and as you said, it's not just editorial people. So also tell us who attends that meeting as well as what happens there.
You'll have the editor who's pitching the book. That could be the publisher. It might be the acquisitions editor. You'll have some key salespeople. It might be a rights person, foreign language rights. It's probably the sales director, maybe some of the key account reps, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, some key marketing people. You'll have production people there, and you'll have contracts people. Now, some publishing houses, the publishers do their own contracts. In the case of the publishing house I work for currently, there's actually a contracts unit that handles all contracts for all books that are signed. So they're always there. But what happens is the publisher takes that business plan and transforms it into a document that is kind of approved for presentation at that meeting. Some publishers may allow you just to use the business plan as written, but most of the time a publisher is going to pull out the pieces from that business plan that are most important, and they're going to enhance it with other things like here are comparable titles, and here's how well they sold in the major channels for books, so that the salespeople have a good understanding of what the potential of that book is in their accounts. We'll also create a P&L, profit and loss statement, which will essentially say, here's how many books we think will sell, here's what the cost is of creating the book, what's our ultimate profit at the end of the day over a particular period of time. And that's usually the make or break as to whether or not the book moves forward. The marketing people are there to weigh in on whether or not they think there are promotional opportunities that they can be involved with that may help boost that print run for the book, or increase the velocity of sales. And then production is there because they're the ones that are manipulating the numbers. So as that conversation takes place, as the sales director is saying, you know what, I think this would be great for promotion at Barnes & Noble, add another 3,000 copies to the P&L. We can look at those numbers in live time and kind of see how that affects our overall profitability. The other people that sometimes are there, depends on how progressive the publisher is a direct-to-consumer salesperson. So in the case of the publisher I work for, we sell a lot of books direct-to-consumer. We have an e-commerce shop, and we do a lot of promotion of our authors direct-to-consumer, and that person will also weigh in on how much they can sell. And that really affects the P&L in a big way because most sales direct-to-consumer are sold at a higher retail price than they would be if you were selling them through Barnes & Noble, because of course you have to give Barnes & Noble a discount. So that can really, raise the revenue of that book substantially.
Right. Okay. So one thing you mentioned I want to have you elaborate on a little bit, and that's the comp titles, because in a book proposal, the aspiring author is going to actually do a competitive analysis and give you some comp titles. Now, they can't really get any great figures on sales, but when you say that you may pull out comp titles, will you take what they've done, or will you do some research on books we can't, those of us who don't have that ability, that we can't
Sure.
find, that are coming out, or is it just about pulling out the sales figures?
We do a lot of that. I mean, one of the mistakes that I think authors make in their proposals sometimes, for example, I'll say, we deal mainly with books on how to write and how to get published. So a lot of the proposals we get, people will say, well, here's a good comp title. It's Bird by Bird. Well, Bird by Bird's one of the classics in the category. And you can compare your book to Bird by Bird in terms of content and maybe appeal, but don't compare it as, if you want to see how well my book could sell, look up Bird by Bird, because I think it'll sell like that. That's like writing a horror novel and saying, compare me to Stephen King. It's not going to work. So I would say, what I recommend to authors is, if you're going to put in comp titles, you can put those category leaders in there if you want, but do it only as a comparison of content. Look at what that core backlist is. Look at the things that are maintaining a pretty, Amazon rankings are hard to gauge what those really mean sometimes, but if you can find backlist books that have consistent ranking under, let's say, 60,000 or thereabouts, and you see that they maintain that level of sales, include things like that. We'll do a lot of work on our own end. I mean, we look up as many comp titles as we think make sense. Be careful of putting too many comp titles in, though, because you may inadvertently put in some dogs that actually hurt your case. And leave that to the publisher to discover instead of giving them that lead.
Right. So you're really looking for the best sellers, right? The ones that are selling well.
Yeah.
Okay. So is the book idea the most important factor, or even the aspiring author's ability to write when you're making these kind of decisions? And if it's not, what is the deciding factor?
Well, I think it actually goes back to the thing I mentioned before, which is, is the idea something that there's an urgent need for it, or a high level of interest? Is there a big audience for it? Is there a USP? And can the author show that they are the right person to write the book? I've seen some writers will come to us with proposals, particularly when I was at Adams Media, and they wanted to write a history book. And the idea was interesting, but there was nothing about that person's background that indicated they had any authority in that category, or that anybody who read the book and said, well, this is really interesting, but then looked at the author bio would feel like that person was in any way qualified to write that sort of history. So, I would just say we really look for that too. You want to look for somebody who looks like they have a voice in that community that's respected. And that ties into platform too, which I know we'll talk about a little bit as well. But, platform is another piece that factors into it, but I would say that's not the biggest piece. I think it's knowing that you have a great idea, an existing audience, a USP, and the right author.
Okay. So and the writing skill. I mean, I always say the writing skill. You can have that that can be fixed by an editor, but you're probably looking to see whether they can write.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I have to say, in the category that we publish in, which is writing instruction, yes, they have to have that ability. So I will say this does change a little bit depending on the category you're publishing in. When I was at Adams Media, when we were doing some kind of crazy books, we felt like we could work with an author to get their manuscript to a place where it would sound okay. But in those cases, sometimes the idea and their following was enough to justify doing the book.
Right. Which goes back to the whole idea of platform, and which we will
Sure.
talk about, and blogging, and having if you're succeeding somewhere, then a publisher is probably going to want you if you have enough potential readers.
Yeah.
Okay. So what tips do you have? Maybe 3 tips for landing a traditional book publishing deal.
Oh, let's see. I think to land a traditional book publishing deal, I mean, this all kind of ties together. I mean, I think when you're sending out your proposal or when you're sending out your query, if you can define the things that we just talked about, value of the idea, your value as the author, and the existence of your audience, I think those are huge. I think little things that can also kind of tip the scales in your favor are if you're coming to a publisher and you can say, I have someone who's a big name who's contributing the foreword, that sort of thing. And the reason why that can help tip the scales is because a bigger name who contributes a foreword goes into your metadata as a contributor to the content. And so, for example, we did a book on social media for writers, and those authors networked with a lot of other professionals in their community, and they got a guy named Chuck Wendig to write a foreword. Now, Chuck, at this moment, is a New York Times bestselling author. So anytime someone goes on BarnesandNoble.com or Amazon.com and searches for Chuck, our book pops up. And the belief is that in a lot of those cases, the fan of Chuck's work is going to find an interest in our book because of his participation. So, that's a great little thing that gives us a sense that not only is the author connected to bigger names that can help promote the book, but we're going to be able to leverage those bigger names to sell more copies.
Right. Okay. That's interesting because, I mean, we often hear about finding someone a good person to have as a to write the foreword, but I actually have never heard somebody talk about how it pops up on Amazon. So that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So how important is platform in the scheme of getting a publishing deal? And what elements of platform actually impress a publisher the most?
Platform for us is, the things that I've already mentioned, I would say are kind of like legs of a chair. If you've got 3 or 4 of those things, your chair is going to be pretty steady. But if you've got platform, it's like going from 3 legs of a chair to 4 legs of a chair. It just makes it all the more steady, all the more reliable, and you can just count on it to perform better. We sign off on plenty of books where the authors don't necessarily have a big platform because we know it meets the other criteria we're looking for. We did a book last year called Essential Writing Skills for College and Beyond. And the author did not have a huge platform, was well qualified to write the book, but did not have a huge platform. And the book did great, purely because, it was a key concept. It was there was a unique take on the material, and we knew that there was a big audience for it. Mm-hmm. If we feel like one of those things is missing, then a platform is a requirement, because we're not going to go into a book that is questionable in any of those 3 or 4 core issues without an author that can help support that book.
Right. Okay. And just back to the platform issue. So I know that our listeners and our watchers are going to be asking about the size of platform, which I know is a subjective thing from publisher to publisher, but can you comment on that at all? Like, how big does a platform have to be to land a traditional publishing deal?
It's a good question, and it's a hard one, because I've seen a lot of publishers who will say, well, I want somebody with, if they've got less than 10,000 Twitter followers, then that's a black mark against the author. And it's like, it's kind of ridiculous, because you could have 80,000 Twitter followers, but if none of them care about your book, then it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's all about how engaged you are with those people and how much you're able to move them to seek out your work. And it's hard to know that. So a lot of times what we look for is, how active is the author in the community? Are they part of the community? Do they understand the needs of its members? And that could be a blog, it could be social media. And we look to see how influential they are. If they have a blog, how many people are engaging with the blog? If someone's writing a blog and there are never any comments with the blog, then I don't really care that you have a blog, because it shows that people aren't really that interested in what you're talking about. But we ask, how many people follow your blog? How many hits are you getting on your blog? So we really want to know what their presence is in the community. What kind of dialogue are they carrying on with members of the community? If that dialogue doesn't really exist, if they're just kind of shouting out into the wilderness, then it doesn't really matter what their elements of their platform are.
Right.
So it's not a platform is a starting point for us with authors. It's like, let's see what they're doing and how engaged they are, but it's not the be all end all.
Okay. And that does differ with each publishing house, right?
I think so. And a lot of publishing houses, and here's the other thing, is that Writer's Digest maybe doesn't worry about it quite as much, because we have a broad reach into the writing community on our own. So an author might bring something to us and their platform isn't that big, but it enhances what we're already doing.
Right.
When I was at Adams Media has no reach into the community. And so we really depended upon authors to kind of bring a big platform with them. That really helped the marketing part.
Right.
So.
Okay. Good distinction.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about the promotion plan? Writers have to have a promotion plan if they're doing nonfiction, and it's part of that business plan or book proposal. So what are 3 top ways that you see for promoting a book that publishers actually want to see? Something that we may not think about as aspiring writers or even published authors. We may not be thinking about this, but this is something you're always looking for in a promotion plan.
Well, for us, particularly since we have such a large reach into the writing community. I mean, one of the things we love for authors to come to us with is to say, what, here's the book that I'm interested in writing, but I'm going to create all this other material as well. Maybe this is supplemental material. Maybe this is, material that you can give away for promotional purposes. Maybe this is material you can give away as a premium with purchase. Volunteering that additional material is great for us, because we do so many promotions direct to the consumer, that being able to offer those sorts of things and have the author come to us with that as part of the plan and say, I know you guys have a great reach into the consumer for writing reference. Here's a special batch of worksheets that you're going to be able to use and offer with the book to anybody that purchases it. That's great. I mean, we love to see that. I would say the other thing is if you can create something to incentivize whatever followers you have to spread word of mouth, that's great too. If you can work with the publisher and the publisher says, yes, go ahead and give away that first chapter for free, or give away some select pieces of the book for free, spread them around. I think that's great. If there's a willingness to do that and you have some followers that would do that on your behalf, that's perfect. A third thing I would say, and I've seen this a lot recently, is I really believe in networking in publishing, especially if you're aspiring to be a professional author, getting to know other professionals in your category and leveraging them to promote your book. I've seen on the fiction side, I'll give a good example. There's an author named Jeremy Robinson, and he has created this huge network. He writes thrillers, and he's created this big network with authors like Sean Ellis, Kane Gilmore, Steve Berry, James Rollins. They all write kind of the same type of books. And whenever any one of them has a book coming out, all of those authors on all of their Facebook pages, all of their blogs are promoting the release of that author's product. So you're getting, in some cases, authors that are much bigger than the author who's just published something talking about that author's book. It gets word of mouth generating really fast. And I think that's one of the values of being engaged with the community, going to writing conferences, making those connections, and offering to promote something for someone.
Right.
Because I think when you offer to do that for somebody else, eventually they're going to turn around and help support you. So it's invaluable, I think, to do that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I see that happening a lot in the blogging community, with guest posts somebody may not be doing a full-blown blog tour or virtual book tour, but they may come to you and say, well, hey, we're blog, associates, and would you run a post of mine to promote my book? And then you can always go back to them and do the same. So I do see that a lot. What are the top 3 tips you would give for how to succeed as a nonfiction author in general?
Well, I think we've kind of hit on most of these already, and that is, the cornerstone things that I mentioned earlier about audience and topic and USP. I think no matter what projects you are doing, and actually the author training manual, talks about this a little bit, and that's coming to each project with this in mind, developing a business plan for every single project, and don't rest on your laurels. If you've gotten published once and you're going back again, spend the same amount of time doing that research and building that business plan. I think you can't really relax on that score. So I recommend that. Again, I would say really be willing to network. If you are anxious about social media or putting yourself out there like that, then networking is the next best thing. Encourage other people to do it on your behalf, and just figure out how to reward them for that. And then I would just say, stay engaged with the community. Stay deep in it and understand what their needs are, understand how you can help, and don't just sell. Give them what they need. And when time comes that you have something to sell, they'll be much more responsive than if you're just tweeting, buy my book, buy my book.
Right.
I think that's huge.
Right. All right, great. And when you're talking about community, you mean for anyone's community, that market that they're trying to target?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't mean like your neighbors. I mean,
right.
yeah, the category in which you're trying to get established. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. All right. And I had a question that popped out of my head. So anyway, so in terms of traditional publishing, we always hear talk about how the industry's changed so much over the last, decade or more. What do you see as the biggest changes, and how do aspiring nonfiction authors or even published nonfiction authors need to adapt to those changes so that they can actually achieve that success they desire?
Well, I guess the biggest change is also, I think there is a narrower funnel for traditionally published books. So it's more competitive. I think, books like the author training manual, that sort of instruction to really help you. And I should say that it's not just about getting your book accepted at a pub board and getting it published. I mean, the reason why it's important to build that business plan is because it helps you generate the end result you want, which is selling through to a consumer, not just getting published. So I think that's why, business plans for nonfiction books are so important. The kind of shrinking of the industry as far as the brick and mortar market goes requires that you put that kind of thought into what you're doing. At the same time, I think the digital side of the industry offers a large amount of opportunity. Not just, a lot of people are self-publishing, which is great, and that's given a ton of people opportunity that maybe don't want to go through the traditional process. But Nina, I know you yourself, in terms of promoting some of your books, have published some shorter ebooks, which you've created to kind of enhance the experience that you're giving to authors and that lead them back to how to blog a book or the author training manual. 10 years ago, you wouldn't have done that. And I think that sort of flexibility gives authors a way to work with publishers that they've never been able to really work with before. I think the other thing that's really interesting is that, and it's still slow to happen in some cases, but 10 years ago, publishers were not selling direct to consumer. There were a few models where you had like Dell paperbacks and they had their little, club that you pull out the little postcard in the back of their paperback books and you could, have some books sent to you, but there was nothing really aggressive or particularly forward thinking about it. And now a lot of publishers are realizing that sometimes the best way to serve the community is to sell directly to them. So there's a whole nother revenue stream potential for publishers that wasn't there before. And I think that's a good question that authors have to ask publishers is, what is their presence in the direct-to-consumer market? What are they doing? And if a publisher can't really answer that question very well, then I think that is now becoming a point of concern rather than something that didn't really matter.
Right. Yeah, I think you've touched on a lot of things, actually, with both your answer to the last question and to this one, because to me, there are just so many opportunities out there for authors. And even if they want to be traditionally published, no matter how they want to publish, but especially if they want to traditionally publish, and if they're publishing nonfiction, it comes back to doing that initial planning, that business planning, and figuring out for each book, could I produce some ebooks that would support, because each one of my ebooks actually advertises the traditionally published book, so it is sending them back there. It also advertises any courses, whether they're Writer's Digest courses or something I'm running, and that's part of the business planning too. Is, as you were mentioning, are there additional materials that I could produce, courses, any other kind of products or services that I could put out there into the world? Because every time you promote one of those, you're promoting the book at the same time and putting yourself out there and building platform and all of those things. So I think that's a big part of this planning. And I do a ton of career planning with people, because that's what really comes out of that whole process of business planning. The whole thing with the author training manual really is to see yourself and your books with a big picture view, not just one book, but where are you going with your whole career, so that you can plan that, because one book is not going to be enough to keep, sustain you, nor will it be enough to keep the publisher interested in you. So you have to write more books so you can sell more books and create that career. So I think that, I was just going to say, I think that the current environment encourages that.
Yeah, and I would also say, learning who your publisher is and what they can do is also something that more attention needs to be paid to, because 10 years ago all you had to do is you get your copy of Writer's Market and you could look up the submission guidelines and kind of figure out what you needed to submit in order to hopefully get a publishing deal. But that's not enough now to understand how you might be able to work with a publisher or what opportunities they have that you can take advantage of. If you were going to submit a book on writing or getting published to Writer's Digest, and maybe you had a few different opportunities to think about, like who you wanted to get published with. But a lot of people don't realize, well, maybe with Writer's Digest I can do a webinar, or maybe I can create a course, or maybe I can teach for them, or maybe, publishers are creating so many other support systems for their content and for their authors that it's good to know who can provide that to you.
Right.
because again, it's more revenue for everybody.
That's right.
So best to know that going in and take advantage of it. I think if you pass up on a publishing deal because you didn't realize those opportunities were available, then that's kind of a a potential mistake.
That's right. And nonfiction authors are in a great position to take advantage of those kind of opportunities
Absolutely.
because their material lends itself to creating more content.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the ways that we look at content when it comes in, and a lot of other publishers are starting to do this too, is it used to be you looked at a proposal as here's a potential book. And we've kind of stopped thinking about it that way. Now we look at it and we say, here's a potential content acquisition, one iteration of which could be a book. But it could also be a series of magazine articles. It could be an online webinar. It could be transformed into a course. It could be a conference session. It could be, so many different things now. And so you look at that author as a content provider and a business partner rather than just somebody who's going to do a one-off.
Right.
So it's a really interesting way of looking at the business now. It's a lot of fun.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And I always talk about, publishers are looking for business partners. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And, that's why I produced the little ebook. After the author training manual, I produced the authorpreneur. For that reason,
right,
because the whole point is to really take every book and begin looking at it as how can I produce, a teleseminar, a webinar, a course, all from the same content.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
So great. Anything you'd want to conclude with, Phil?
The only thing I would conclude with is just to say that, even though we talked about, diminishing shelf space and more competition, I think that if you are choosing to become a nonfiction author, I think it is far easier to get published as a nonfiction author. I think it's much easier to make a business case. And I think there are more tools now to help you make that case. So, even barring all those things that can be a little intimidating about it, I think it's a great time.
Super. Well, I hope everybody who's watching and listening will take that encouragement and move forward, because I love traditional publishing. So I know a lot of people think now is the time to go the independent route, but I think that traditional publishing still has tons to offer. So.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you being here today, Phil, and speaking to my audience. It was a wonderful interview filled with just jam-packed with great information that I don't think that they normally hear. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So this is Nina Amir, the Inspiration to Creation Coach. I hope you all are going to take the Write Nonfiction in November challenge and finish a work of nonfiction in 30 days. We are partway through the month, but there's still time to do that. So until then, go out and achieve more inspired results.